Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. According to spoilers on The Young and the Restless, Kyle Abbott might ask Claire Newman to marry him. When the Audra Charles truth comes to light, would Kyle utilize that as evidence of his loyalty? Fans of YNR are aware that Kyle decided to keep some important details about his time in Nice with Audra from Claire. Though it wasn't totally accurate, Kyle promised Claire that nothing had happened and that he would never betray her. Claire still needs to find out that Audra and Kyle continued to kiss a lot in her sleeping automobile. Naturally, Claire must also find out that Kyle was only wearing a towel at the moment and that he accompanied Audra to the bed before retreating. Kyle was allegedly planning to reveal Audra's seduction plot with Victor, but did he really need to go that far? When the true story eventually comes to light, Claire will most likely ask that question. Kyle's partial disclosure will raise some red flags and further cast doubt on Claire's loyalty. Claire will undoubtedly begin to question whether Audra is correct in assuming that Kyle genuinely wants her in place of her. As Kyle considers the idea of losing Claire, he might start to panic. When Kyle is desperate to show Claire is the only woman he can have, what will he do? Kyle might even pop the question. It's possible that Kyle will propose to Claire and declare her his lifelong partner. In an attempt to prove to Claire that Audra is completely unimportant to him, Kyle would press for an engagement. Kyle might at least try to show Claire that he is committed to her by making a marriage proposal, even though there is no assurance she will accept any wedding preparations. Whatever happens, according to previews for The Young and the Restless, Kyle will need to change his approach as Claire learns more about what happened in France. Kyle has created a lot of problems for himself, but is it possible that an engagement ring would help him get out of it? For a long time, the relationships between Kyle, Claire, and Audra have been a source of conflict, treachery, and emotional turmoil. The consequences are disastrous when Audra's truth is revealed, casting doubt on Kyle's allegiance and motivations. Following this disclosure, Kyle's choice to pop the question to Claire can be seen as a last-ditch effort to prove his commitment. However, considering the situation and the date, this gesture's genuineness is called into question. Instead of being a sincere commitment, the suggestion might be an attempt to divert attention from the mayhem that Audra's revelations have produced. There have been times of intense closeness in Kyle and Claire's relationship, but they have also been clouded by dishonesty and outside intervention. Because of her frequent attempts to put a rift between them through deceit and manipulation, Audra's position in their lives has been especially upsetting. Kyle is left rushing to restore his relationship with Claire after her most recent plot comes to light, revealing ulterior motives and betrayals. His first reaction, making a marriage proposal, indicates that he has to take back control of the story. Kyle makes an extravagant romantic gesture in an attempt to hasten their reconciliation rather than giving Claire time to digest the betrayal and determine whether she can trust him once more. The proposal's timing is important. Since it comes right after Audra's truth blows up, it seems more reactionary than natural. The act would have been more significant if Kyle had been preparing to pop the question before the scandal. Rather, it seems like a damage control tactic, an attempt to divert attention from his own dubious behavior and toward a future he is now abruptly keen to establish. Claire, who is already in shock from Audra's disclosures, would see this as emotional blackmail, an effort to avoid responsibility by using a lifetime commitment as a diversion. In addition, the idea calls into question Kyle's intentions. Is he genuinely committed to Claire, or is he just trying to win her allegiance before she has a chance to change her mind? In this situation, marriage can be more about ownership than love, a means of keeping Claire confined to him in spite of the recent upheaval. The basic foundation of trust necessary for a happy marriage is undermined if his proposal is motivated more by fear of losing her than by a sincere desire to create a future together. Claire's response is just as instructive. She might be willing to overlook recent betrayals in order to maintain their connection if she accepts the proposal right away. But this might also point to a habit of supporting Kyle's snap judgments without dealing with the underlying problems. However, it would be a hint that Audra's discoveries have seriously damaged her trust in Kyle if she hesitates or rejects him, making his proposal appear like too little, too late. This moment has wider ramifications than just their intimate bond. In contrast to Audra's disarray, Kyle's proposition might also be a calculated attempt to position himself as the reliable spouse. He tries to portray Audra as the antagonist, the one who aimed to ruin what they had, by presenting himself as the man ready to give Claire his whole attention. However, this story disregards whatever part Kyle might have played in enabling Audra's influence to endure. Audra's plans might not have had the same effect if he had been completely honest with Claire from the start. Furthermore, Kyle might be able to regain agency through the suggestion. He can feel helpless or emasculated after becoming entangled in Audra's web of lies, and a romantic gesture like a marriage proposal enables him to regain control of the relationship. He chooses a big, symbolic act, one that demands an immediate response rather than promoting true healing, instead of doing the hard work of restoring trust via honesty and consistency. The suggestion poses a conundrum for Claire. Accepting it entails deciding to go on without completely healing the scars caused by Audra's treachery, and, thus, Kyle's potential collusion. But turning it down would mean abandoning a relationship in which she has put a lot of money, even if it has been unstable. Her choice will show whether she values emotional stability more than the possibility of heartache in the future. To sum up, Kyle's proposal to Claire following the revelation of Audra's truth is a loaded gesture that holds just as much mystery as romance. Although it might be presented as evidence of his loyalty, the situation raises the possibility of hidden agendas, whether intentional or not. The timing, the absence of any previous marriage-related conversation, and the pressing need to repair Audra's harm all suggest a hasty decision rather than a sincere one. The future of their relationship will depend on whether Claire sees through this or decides to accept the proposal as a fresh start. In any case, this instance highlights how brittle trust is and how far people will go to maintain it, or give the appearance of it. Nothing could have prepared anybody for the twisted partnership between Claire, Kyle, and Kane, a perilous combination of ambition, desperation, and raw emotion that would threaten to pull the Newman Empire apart from the inside out, but the tension in Genoa City had been building for weeks. It began subtly, almost innocently, with furious discussions behind closed doors and murmurs in shadowy nooks. For months, Kyle had harbored a grudge against Victor Newman because he was tired of the way Victor seemed to control everyone like chess pieces on a board. Claire, however, had her own past with the Newmans. She was a dangerous wild card because of her complex relationships with the family, her need to prove herself, and her residual resentment. Under the pretense of light conversation, the two of them started getting together more frequently, but the true topic of conversation was always Victor and the harm they felt he had inflicted. The distinction between annoyance and obsession became increasingly hazy as the chats became more intense. One night, in the low-back booth of a club that was almost completely deserted, Kyle leaned forward and whispered a suggestion so frightening and ridiculous that even Claire was initially taken aback: what if Victor were gone forever? She initially dismissed it with a joke, but the seed had been sown, and over the course of the following few days, she kept thinking about it, flipping it over, and picturing what it would be like to be free of Victor's influence. They eventually came to the realization that, although they knew someone who would, neither of them have the icy ruthlessness to carry it out directly. Kane Ashby, a man with a history full of dubious choices and enough resentments to fill a notepad, was that someone. Although Kane didn't publicly discuss his personal reasons for disliking Victor, his past with the Newman family was tainted by betrayals and power struggles. When Claire and Kyle originally came to him, Kane told them they were crazy and that even he wouldn't cross this line. Despite the fact that need wears people down, they persisted. They began to dangle the things they knew he desired: cash, power, and the opportunity to embarrass Victor in a way that would garner media attention. With a combination of charm, manipulation, and cold, hard money, they gradually started to erode his resistance until one evening, after a protracted silence and a heavy sigh, Kane finally asked the question they had been waiting for: when do you want it done? The strategy took on a life of its own after that. Any move against Victor had to be careful, well thought out, and precisely timed because they knew he was too intelligent to be taken on head-on. Claire started giving Kane information on Victor's whereabouts, his alone time, and the routines he relied on because she had insider knowledge of the Newman world. Kyle took care of the practicalities by using his business contacts, cash transfers that were impossible to trace, untraceable burner phones, and even a network of alibis to hide their tracks when the time came. The three had difficult meetings, with lengthy silences and sporadic outbursts of paranoia interspersed with their discussions. They were aware that the plot and possibly their freedom would be over if anyone learned of what they were up to. Victor, who has always been a perceptive and watchful father, recognized that something was wrong. He observed how Claire appeared preoccupied during discussions and how Kyle's eyes seemed to linger a bit too long when their paths crossed. Although he lacked evidence, he had a gut feeling that disaster was coming and discreetly started asking his own questions. The conspirators were unaware that Victor's network of informants was already at work, compiling snippets of conversations that had been overheard, following mysterious movements, and assembling a puzzle that was gradually exposing the contours of treachery. For his part, Kane was struggling with his own uncertainties. He found himself lying awake at night more and more as the work drew near, questioning whether this was really worth it. With the money now taken and the promises made, there was no going back now, but he couldn't help but feel that Victor was always one step ahead of him and that the old man might be allowing things to happen in order to see who would betray him. There was an odd sensation of serenity on the day of the anticipated hit. Under the guise of a confidential business transaction, Claire had made sure Victor would be at a remote location. The last payment to Kane had been handled by Kyle, who slid the envelope over the table with a little tremor in his palms. They believed that everything was in its proper place. Kane could feel his heartbeat thumping in his ears as he walked up to the property, the late afternoon sun creating long shadows on the gravel path. Victor was waiting inside, but not in the manner Kane had anticipated. He entered the darkened room and saw Victor sitting quietly at the head of a table with a small smile on his face, as though he had been waiting for him. With a steady, almost amused tone, Victor remarked, "I wondered how long it would take before you showed your true colors." The entire plot has been compromised, Kane realized as he froze. Before he could say anything, two men appeared out of the darkness, and it was obvious that Kane had lost control of the situation. Back in town, Claire and Kyle were anxiously pacing while keeping their phones close at hand in anticipation of word. For hours, there was only a deafening quiet that got heavier by the minute, with neither a call nor a text. When Kane eventually knocked on Kyle's door, it was Victor, who was standing there with a chilly, triumphant expression. Instead of a shouting and violent altercation, something much more terrifying transpired. Victor didn't need to speak louder because he exuded a serene power that comes from knowing that you've already won. He detailed every action they had taken, demonstrating that he had known about their scheme from the start. He described how every action they took had been foreseen and documented, and how he had given them just enough rope to hang themselves. Then came the threat, a reminder that he now controlled their destinies rather than a direct threat of incarceration or retaliation. They would do exactly what he wanted, when he wanted, without question, from this point on. The police would be notified of any deviation, any indication of disobedience, and any proof of their conspiracy. When Claire realized they had not only failed, but also had permanently tied themselves to Victor, her stomach dropped. Pale and trembling, Kyle could hardly look Victor in the eye. Kane was forced to question whether he had been set up from the beginning, used as bait to bring out Victor's adversaries, as he was caught between relief and remorse. Under the surface, things had drastically changed, but in the days that followed, Genoa City seemed to be returning to normal. Claire and Kyle realized they were imprisoned, like puppets dancing on strings they had foolishly attempted to break, while Victor continued with his business as if nothing had occurred. And Kane, who left with nothing but his life, knew better than anyone that you don't try to overthrow Victor Newman in a place like Genoa City. You don't even consider it. Because he will always be ahead of you, and it will be too late by the time you know it. Before either of them understood what they were getting into, what began as an angry conversation between two people who had every reason to despise Victor Newman turned into something far darker and incomparably more frightening. For weeks, Kyle Abbott had been harboring a grudge against Victor, which grew with each condescending look, deceptive power move, and reminder that Victor Newman always prevailed in Genoa City. He detested Victor's treatment of everyone, even rivals, friends, and family, as pieces to be moved at his whim and cast aside when their usefulness was over. Despite being more recent to the intricate webs of the Newman Empire, Claire Grace had a complex past that included humiliation, bitterness, and a strong desire to demonstrate that she could face a guy like Victor head-on without recoiling. At first, their interactions were informal, involving small talk after work meetings, sharing concerns over drinks, and the kind of common ground that makes individuals feel like allies. However, as the weeks passed, the length and intensity of those discussions increased until they were almost all about Victor, his command, and the way he appeared to smirk when they didn't work. Kyle came up with the concept first, but he was afraid to say it aloud. For her part, Claire found a perilous sense of fulfillment in envisioning a future in which Victor Newman was no longer manipulating events. Kyle eventually forgot the idea one evening while hiding in a dimly lit corner of a peaceful bar, the air heavy with the smell of wood polish and whiskey. What if he disappeared? His eyes met hers as he requested in a hushed whisper. Claire smirked when she initially believed he meant gone as in retired, out of the picture, but the intensity of his gaze informed her otherwise. He meant gone. As in forever. Despite being ridiculous, careless, and foolish, the thought stuck in her head like a splinter she was unable to remove. Over the next few days, it began to feel more like a possibility than an absurd suggestion. Both of them were aware that they couldn't carry it out. If things didn't work out, they didn't have the stomach, the skills, or the capacity to hide their traces. Kyle then brought up Cain Ashby. Cain was a man with a convoluted past in Genoa City, filled with betrayals, plots, and a resume full of both personal and professional setbacks. Although he had never betrayed Victor personally, he had no love for him. He was the type of man who could accomplish tasks in silence and who had the knowledge of the underworld to make someone vanish without a trace. But it would be a different story to persuade him. Their initial encounter with Cain was awkward, bordering on comical. They had set it up so they could talk about a business possibility, but Cain saw right through them before they had a chance to discuss it. He leaned back in his chair and stated dryly, "You two look like you're about to pitch me something that's going to get us all killed." At first, Kyle attempted to be evasive by discussing removing obstacles and leveling the playing field, but Claire was more direct. Her voice was firm yet low as she stated, "We want Victor gone." After giving her a lengthy look, Cain shook his head. No. Not intrigued. They didn't give up, though, since whatever you think you're giving me isn't worth the heat that will be directed at anyone who touches him. They kept Cain close by inviting him to parties, involving him in tiny side projects, and showing him how wealthy they were throughout the course of the following week. They offered him a payoff that would have positioned him for years to come. They played on his resentment, gently reminding him of the times Victor had carelessly steamed over individuals. Cain's resolve gradually, almost subtly, started to crumble. He leaned forward, his face impassive, and posed the question they had been waiting for one evening following an especially drawn-out and stressful meeting: "When do you want it done?" They were then captivated by the planning. Because Claire knew the Newman family well, she started giving Cain specific information on Victor's itinerary, including where he would be, who he would be with, and when he may be less secure. The operational part was handled by Kyle, who used his contacts to set up cash transactions that couldn't be traced back to them, unmarked cars, and burner phones that couldn't be traced. Every encounter was tinged with paranoia. They chatted in fragments, changed locations frequently, and avoided being spotted together in public for extended periods of time. They believed they were exercising caution, but nothing in Genoa City eludes Victor Newman for very long. Before he understood the details, Victor had sensed the change. Kyle's looks had become colder and sharper, while Claire's responses were short and sounded preoccupied. He had too many years of life and too many conflicts under his belt to disregard his instincts. He started to draw his own strings quietly. He kept his suspicions to himself and refrained from confronting them. Rather, he gave his people instructions to observe, pay attention, and collect everything covertly. He cobbled up a picture of betrayal piece by piece, including meetings with Kane, mysterious absences, and a paper trail of questionable transactions that no one else would have seen. He waited nonetheless. Meanwhile, Kane was beginning to feel the consequences of his agreement. He began to worry more and more as the day drew nearer whether this was a job he would quit. Although he had previously committed dubious acts, he was Victor Newman, and his removal would permanently alter the balance of power in Genoa City. Furthermore, Kane secretly doubted that anyone could truly outsmart Victor. Nevertheless, the day arrived. Claire had arranged for Victor to attend a private meeting with a possible investor at one of his more remote locations. In a dark parking garage, Kyle had handed over the envelope to Kane, his hand shaking as he made the last payment. Though his voice lacked confidence, Kyle had stated, "Once it's done, it's done." With the sun low in the sky and the smell of rain lingering in the air, Kane drove alone out to the property. With deliberate steps and a laser-like focus, he moved with the accuracy of a man who had done this before.